as I said, thank you everyone for being here. Welcome to Creating Change, a panel discussion on working towards ending unpaid social work internships. As we get started, just some quick Zoom reminders. We are recording the full length of today's presentation so that it can be shared publicly and be available to others who are not able to attend tonight. So we do ask that you keep your audio muted throughout the presentation, but absolutely encourage you to engage as much as you'd like through the chat feature and using the reaction buttons. And so just to make sure everything's connected all right, could you put a plus sign in the chat just to let me know that you can hear me all right? Awesome, great. Thank you for that confirmation. Sounds like we are good to go. And so before we begin, I want to take a moment to recognize that Payment for Placements National is made up of 59 chapters nationwide, ranging from coast to coast on land belonging to the First Peoples. We acknowledge that the land we are all living, working, and fighting together on is stolen land, land originally stewarded by many Indigenous nations. We also pause to recognize and acknowledge the labor upon which our country, states, and institutions are built. We remember that our country is built on the labor of enslaved people who were kidnapped and brought to the US from the African continent, and recognize the continued contribution of their survivors. We also acknowledge all immigrant labor, including voluntary, involuntary, trafficked, forced, and undocumented peoples who contributed to the building of the country and continue to serve within our labor force. We recognize our debt to exploited workers, past and present, whose labor was and continues to be stolen through unjust practices. And finally, we recognize that we live in an exploitative, labor-obsessed society, and we pledge to keep on fighting to end the exploitation and continued dehumanization of oppressed peoples for the liberation of us all. I want to express my deep gratitude for the opportunity to gather and learn together with you all today. My name is Aiden Bondurant. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the co-founder and co-chair of the P4P Advocacy Alliance and am an organizational social worker. So I focus on promoting communal thriving inside organizations and within the greater community. I received my graduate social work education from both University of Kansas and Columbia University in New York online, and I'm now located in the Kansas City, Missouri metro area. And I'm so excited to moderate today's panel. We have an amazing group of panelists to learn from today, and we also want to learn from you. So right now, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat if you're comfortable. You can share your name, your location, role, anything else that you're comfortable sharing as we work to build our advocacy networks to support students. And while you're introducing and connecting with others in the chat, I'd love to give a quick overview of P4P for those who may not be familiar. So Payment for Placements, or P4P, is a nationwide movement started in 2021, led by social work students calling for fair payment for their mandatory internships, also known as Practicum placements, which they must complete in order to graduate. And as of today, there are 59 P4P chapters across the country, with more chapters continuing to sign onto our cause. The P4P movement believes that all social work students should be paid for their internships, that paid internships will improve student well-being and promote educational success, that paid internships will make social work education more inclusive and accessible, reducing the barriers to obtaining a social work degree and gaining social work employment, which will in turn make the social work profession as a whole more socioeconomically and racially diverse. And that paying all social work students for their internships will be a historic investment in care work, which employers often undervalue. Social work students across the nation are taking action to secure paid placements for all through campus rallies, collaborative research projects, media outreach, state legislative advocacy, and joint faculty student task forces. They've raised awareness of the need for paid practicums to address systemic injustice and strengthen the future of the social work profession. And in 2024, we also started the P4P Advocacy Alliance, which specifically engages non-student social workers as advocates for paid social work internships. So the P4P movement is student-led, but achieving the mission of increased access to paid internships requires advocacy and action from many stakeholders, including social work and allied practitioners, nonprofit and government employees, practicum administrators, supervisors, researchers, educators, policy workers, and the like. So if you're interested in being directly involved with the movement, please complete our P4P supporter survey. We'll put that link in the chat for you. Our next meeting is April 1st, and we would love to see you there. And today, March 5th, marks the first day of our P4P 2025 National Week of Action, which is super exciting. Social work students across the United States are prepared to participate in this National Week of Action, March 5th through the 12th, which is organized by P4P to demand the end of unpaid internships in social work education through increased paid internship opportunities. And this is actually the third iteration of the P4P National Week of Action, which first launched in 2023. So from the East to the West Coast, P4P chapters have staged walkouts, held rallies, conducted social media and letter writing campaigns to organize their student bodies and bring national awareness to the problems that unpaid practicum placements cause for the profession. We also invite you to connect with us. In the chat, you'll find links to our website and social media. We're excited to keep you informed and to also learn from you. So please connect and communicate with us to support the cause in any way you can. And we're excited to find ways that we can support you. But now, getting to the panel, I'm so excited to be able to introduce to you our panelists for today. So first we have Christian Adeleke, LMSW, he, him, his. He is a social work scholar and practitioner and PhD student at the University of Texas at Arlington School of Social Work. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Florida State University and a Master of Social Work from Florida International University. Christian has over 5 years of experience in several human service sectors, including substance misuse and mental health, child welfare, children and youth, medical social work, housing, crisis work, and individual and group psychotherapy. Christian's research interests include the ways in which professional social work in its current form upholds the oppressive systems it claims to challenge. And in his view, social work education's signature pedagogy of unpaid internships is one of the most consequential structural changes needed within the social work profession to not only create a more just and equitable profession, but also ensure this 19th century profession's sustainability in a diverse and evolving world. We also have Dan Kaminsky, who is a current MSW student at Fordham School of Social Work and will be graduating this August. Prior to joining social work school, Dan's first career was in local politics and community organizing, where he worked on campaigns in local nonprofits and in state government. Upon entering social work school, Dan quickly started organizing with other Fordham students around unpaid placement. In his second semester, he was part of the successful campaign to reduce the required internship hours at Fordham School of Social Work. And since then, the majority of his P4P related efforts have been focused on writing and organizing around a bill that will soon be introduced in the New York State Legislature to get social work interns funded through the state budget. We have Drew Tonjes, who is a dual MSW and MPP student at the University of Houston's Graduate College of Social Work and Hobby School of Public Affairs. She's a macro concentration student specializing in political social work, graduating this May. Drew is the co-chair of the University of Houston's P4P chapter, where she collaborates with students, faculty, staff, NASW Texas, and other Texas chapters in advocacy efforts. And she's also the Legislation and Partnership Committee chair for the National P4P movement, where she helped form partnerships and led projects on bill tracking, power mapping, and legislative advocacy. She has experience advocating for paid practicum placements at the local, state, and federal levels. And lastly, we have Maribel Tellez, who holds both a bachelor's and a master's in social work from New Mexico State University. She currently serves as the practicum director and assistant professor at the NMSU School of Social Work. And her recent work focuses on developing community programs for adults with serious mental illness and those involved in the criminal justice system. Additionally, she has experience working with student and community services. A native of Las Cruces, New Mexico, Mari resides there with her husband and their 2 daughters. So welcome, Christian, Dan, Drew, and Maribel. We're so excited to have you, and we're so excited to learn with you. So first, we're going to dive into our moderated question and answer session, followed by questions from the audience. Those of you in the audience, please feel free to post your questions and conversation in the chat. We'll try to sprinkle those questions in the discussion as we go along. But if we're not able to include it during the conversation, we will definitely have time at the end to go over those questions that you have. So first, I'd love to just pose to our panelists, like, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became aware of the need for paid social work internships. Dan, let's go ahead and start with you.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Aiden. Thanks, everybody. Really good to see you. So this I'll keep brief because I don't think my story is all that different from most social work students. I got to school, and within the first few weeks, I was like, wait, what? I'm going to work and not getting paid? I do not understand what's happening here. And so I think that was a pretty quickly I felt incredibly outraged at having to go to work several times a week and not be paid for it. I think that outrage grew when the very first class I had to take was a human rights class, and it just felt so intensely hypocritical. And the kicker for me, though, really the thing that got me organizing was I was also working 20, 30-hour weeks. I live in New York City. I have to pay rent. I don't have an option. And so it just immediately was like, how can this be the entrance into this field? This needs to change. So within semester 1, I started talking to students, and we formed a P4P chapter, and the rest is history. And I'm looking forward to getting into the meat of it, kind of what we did and how to push this thing forward.
Absolutely. And Drew, what was your experience as a student as well?
Yeah, my experience was very similar to Dan's, where I started the program and I was doing the application process, and I was like, wow, that is a lot of unpaid labor. And also, like, at the same time, I was seeing like engineering students get paid $28 an hour for their internships. So I was like, oh, I'm required to do this internship and I'm required to do it for free, most likely. So that kind of got me into organizing and like talking to my classmates and then forming a chapter at the University of Houston.
And it usually, once you're connecting with other people, other students, it's then you all start to realize, wait a second, something's up here. So yeah, I appreciate that. Christian, how about you?
Yeah, and first of all, thank you for this opportunity and hello, everyone. I became aware of unpaid internships as a student myself, and now as a scholar, I had to take out a lot of loans as a student just to make ends meet, and I would be working my job at my placement. So that would be kind of challenging at times. So just juggling all of those responsibilities and roles that I had. Um, it was very distressing, to say the least.
Absolutely. And Maribel, I'm curious because you've been both a student and are now working as a practicum director, like what your views are having both of those perspectives.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I was a student over 20 years ago. And honestly, it was not even a question of whether we were going to get paid or not. Like, we just already knew that we weren't going to get paid. And yes, it was maddening. And yes, we also had to work. So many of my cohort members were working as well as doing their practicum. Got out as soon as I could, got a job, and was in the field for lots of years. I came back to the university 4 years ago, and I saw the same thing is happening still. And a high number of our students here at New Mexico State University qualify for financial aid and Pell Grants. I mean, I have seen as high as 89% of our students. I have also heard from them that they are working 40 plus hours a week in order to keep their families going, in order to pay their bills, and then plus have to do an additional 15 to 20 hours of practicum. At the time, when I first began working here, I didn't know of any agencies that offered paid practicums. I started going to conferences and listening to people talk about how they are working towards getting 100% paid practicums for their student. And I thought, this is a goal for me, for my team, and for my university. This is what I want for my students. And so really just came back very motivated within the last 2 years, have started really looking into placements for students that are paid.
Right. We just need one school or one situation to set the example for others and show that it is possible. It may be challenging to get there sometimes, but it's absolutely possible. So the next question I have for you all, how have you seen students impacted by unpaid social work practicum placements? And how do you think being paid would change students' overall educational experience and preparation for a career in social work? Dan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess the place I'll start is that Fordham P4P chapter put out a survey to about 200 social work students on just this question: how is unpaid internships affecting your experience? And something like 75% of them said it's impacting their studies, 95% of them said it's impacting their mental health, and 95% of them said it's impacting their finances. So I want to actually break down the first two. So starting with academics, something like 70% of students in America, social work students in America, are doing work on top of their internship. So they're going to school, they're working, and they're doing internship. There are studies, and I'm happy to send this along, Aiden, for you to send out if that's of interest, to show that students who are working plus doing their internship are more burnt out than professionals in the field. Social work is a high burnout profession, right? So we are starting our careers in a place of burnout. And we could talk about why social work is a high burnout profession. That's its own kind of low pay and long, the whole thing. But we're starting our careers in a place of burnout. And ironically, same studies show that people who are burnt out cannot take in new information. It impedes their ability to learn. So if the goal of internships is to aid in learning, it is very likely undermining the very purpose that it's supposed to serve. I know that is absolutely true for me. I have read probably 3% of the readings that I'm assigned because I just have no time. I would love to read the readings, right? I would love to be a better student than I am, but I just do not have capacity for it. So that's the main thing, the burnout thing, which I hope we can get into. I think that is really important. And then the other thing, the mental health survey, just to say a piece of this, just to say a few sentences on it. Again, we put it out to the students and just asked an open-ended question: how is it impacting your life? And we got pages of results, and they were devastating, truly devastating. People saying causing extreme stress and depression, causing my anxiety to spike like never before, having to think twice about buying food, like really intense shit, all in the service of supposedly trying to aid in one's education to become a social worker. So yeah, I'll leave it there, and again, dive in more to all of it as we go.
Yeah, and those anecdotal reports, just stories from students, are so powerful. I mean, before I started my degree, I had a friend who was an MSW student and had explained to me her experience in not being paid and the huge impact it had on her. And it helped equip me during my learning experience. But it just can be really exhausting. I definitely feel that. Drew, what do you think?
Gonna second what Dan said. I've definitely also seen like my classmates struggling to engage with coursework, being exhausted. I've heard about food insecurity people are facing, and then having multiple jobs. And then I've definitely seen a lot of burnout already. I've actually experienced it myself. In my first practicum placement, I was not being paid, and I was also working like part-time job and doing some contract work on the side to support myself. And that was really stressful and hard. And now I'm lucky that my final placement is paid. So that has meant that I don't have to work an additional part-time job. I'm able to sleep. I'm able to focus on my coursework and like finish off my school like strong. And that has made a big impact and difference. I feel less burnt out and exhausted. And I'm like, everybody should get to experience that. Nobody should have to not be paid for their labor. So getting paid this last year has been really great.
Always love to hear about an internship that's paid. What a great opportunity. And we definitely want to see that for more students. Christian, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would say my response is a mix of Dan's and Drew's. So seeing the national payment for placement survey that was administered in 2023, I've been analyzing that data set, and we also looked at depression, anxiety, burnout, food insecurity, to the extent that over half of the sample experienced food insecurity. It was just a matter of seeing the severity of the food insecurity. And I also was not paid for my first internship. So I really struggled through that one. But my second internship was paid through a fellowship. So I think that's more of the exception and not the rule. And I believe it's 10 to 20% of social work internships are paid. And of those that are paid, pay as little as $400 for a whole semester of work. And 2 of those semesters back to back, that could end up being 400 hours. And in a field like social work, you're just never going to make that money back.
So I know one of the common responses we get, even when we hear how hard it is for students to have these unpaid internships or practicum placements, we hear about these barriers to getting access to those paid internships. So what are the most common barriers you would say for students gaining access to paid practicum internships? And I'll kind of throw this back to you, Christian.
It's an attitude change. So social work tends to be a status quo profession. So a lot of the rules and regulations and policies and standards, they're stratified in place. So there's no real reason for why we continue to do it this way. It's just the way that the system's built. And so kind of seeing both sides of the coin now as a PhD student, I've seen programs that have been supportive of even exploring the prospect of providing paid internships for their students. But all too often, we have a lot of those anecdotal sayings like, we're in it for the outcome, not the income. And didn't you know what you were signing up for? So kind of pushing back against that narrative. Just because I'm devoting my life to service and improving the human condition, I don't believe that should mean that I'm going to food banks and housing insecure. So the work is already hard enough as is. So this is just an added layer on top of that.
Right. We can definitely have a both and of being dedicated to the mission of the work, and not prioritizing like profit or necessarily high income, but just being able to, have what one needs to be able to have a healthy and thriving situation to support one's well-being. That should be the norm. Maribel, what do you think?
Yeah, so I talk to agencies all the time about offering paid practicums to students. And the biggest thing that I get is there's no funding. We don't have funding. We have a hard enough time paying ourselves. How can we be expected to pay students? Or even the attitude, just like Christian said, I didn't get paid when I was a student. Why should my students? So that's one thing that we're really trying to work with our agencies to understand that it's about social justice. It's about bringing the acknowledgement to the social work field and acknowledging that we deserve to be paid what we deserve to be paid. And our students, it starts with our students. So yeah, very limited access to payment.
Yeah, and I see some questions posed in the chat that I think are also statements in and of themselves, like what is the history behind the unpaid internships, social work's roots in the settlement movement and charity work, the medical model of the overworked intern and resident. So I think those are questions and both statements all in one. And so knowing that,
Hayden, can I jump
yeah.
in and say a couple comments in response to Christian and Mari's? I think you all raised some awesome points that got me thinking. I think the first is one of the most common things we do here is kind of the back in my day arguments, which Mari, you're referencing. So like, well, we didn't get paid, so why should you get paid? This is one of the many arguments that grinds my gears. My responses tend to be twofold. One, the cost, at least in the New York City region, I'll speak for here, the cost of living isn't comparable. So like maybe not getting paid 20, 30 years ago was somewhat reasonable. It just is not anymore. So there's that. And two, it's a bad system. So there's really no argument. It is completely contradictory to the ideals of social work. So why would we want to perpetuate that system just because you had to do it? Shouldn't we be aiming towards change? So there's that to say. The other thing is that argument really services to keep things in place. And I think that is rooted in a devaluing of the labor. And I think that, and we haven't talked about this yet, but like it is worth considering, why is this labor devalued? I would argue something like 85% of students right now identify as female. And so it's kind of a larger trend of devaluing work that's deemed feminized, right? And so I think it really has its roots in patriarchy and larger systems of oppression, not simply just that it's social work, right? It's a larger care work phenomenon. And the final thing I'll say that sparked it is, you know, one of the things that is so high burnout of the field is that it is a low wage profession, as we just said, rooted in all these systems. But I do believe that the low wages starts when you enter the field. So if your first entrance into the field, you are making nothing, that sets the floor as low as it can possibly go. And so I really believe if we want to think about social workers downstream making better incomes, which I care about deeply because I will soon be there, and I also just think this profession needs to be valued. I think we need to raise the floor for everybody. And I think that starts with interns.
And I feel like that so perfectly hits on the next question that was submitted in the chat. So what do unpaid internships say about the nonprofit industrial complex and its inability to provide truly liberatory care to clients? I mean, do any of you all have thoughts on that? It's a big question and a valid one. Now, I know, Christian, you've done some research and presented on, you know, decolonization of the field of social work. And so I just am curious what your thoughts are on how this would relate to just the largest system of the nonprofit industrial complex that could put, you know, I would say, and, you know, curious what y'all think. I just feel like all of these gaps in addressing these issues of injustice within the student labor system, it obviously trickles down and weighs on the student. They're feeling, and we know that agencies and, you know, universities and everyone feels this challenge, but at the end of the day, the student is having to bear a lot of that weight.
Absolutely. And just as a matter of fact, unpaid labor is a colonial construct, and that can be traced back to apprenticeships and indentured servitude. And I know there's been a shift in the language around field education. I still call it field education because in the lexicon and in the literature, it still is field education. But I worry about changing the language without changing the practice. So I'm going to continue calling it field education until we make some real change. And you touched on a lot there. So I'm just going to hold it out for some of the other panelists.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. And, you know, as we're talking about this, there's a lot of passion behind from students and non-students about this area. how do we convince those in power at the agency, institutional, state, and federal level to care about this issue? You know, if we're having this challenge of, you know, it's always been done this way, why do we need to change it? It's too hard to find paid practicums. How do we convince those in power at these various levels to care? Maribel, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'll start. I think it's about advocacy for ourselves. Our students, all my students here at NMSU are reluctant to advocate for themselves. And so one of the conversations that we have with them, especially when they're looking for a practicum, is that they need to advocate for themselves and they need to make it known that they would like to be paid. We host a practicum fair for our agencies, where our students come in and talk to them and ask questions. They can schedule interviews. And one of the questions we ask our agencies is this practicum going to be paid? And I can't tell you how many agencies do not want to answer that, or they answer, well, it is this year, but next year it's not going to be. So we have to tell our students, you need to let them know that this is appreciated, this is needed, this is something that you want. We also let our agencies know that we do have paid practicums and our students are flocking to those agencies. And pretty soon our students are not going to go even talk to the agencies that are not offering paid practicums. So it's really important for it to start with our students. Now here in New Mexico, there has been a huge acknowledgement of the work that social workers do. It has started kind of like as a grassroots effort to create a social work task force throughout the state. And one of the first things that was brought to the table was paid practicums and how we need to start with our students, and then it can go up the ladder, just like Dan said. And so we've really lobbied with our legislatures, and we have been very lucky and been awarded some funding to pay for students. So right now I have the ability to pay 35 students that are not receiving any payment for their practicums. And that has come down because it was signed as a legislative thing that comes down to NMSU. And so we're really lobbying to keep that going and to keep that funding going. And so we're really just being loud advocates for ourselves and for our students.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Drew and Dan, I know both of you have done some advocacy. Could you speak to your experience and just how you feel like we can convince those in power to care?
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think I'm thinking of it, yeah, from the state and federal level. I'm in Texas, so we always have to consider, like, and anywhere you have to consider your political context. And for us, like, we've taken a more of like a workforce shortage angle. Like, there's severe workforce shortages in Texas of social workers. We provide essential services to the community. We're government employees, clinicians, caseworkers, advocates, community organizers. We work in nonprofits. We do essential work for Texas that impacts community. So an investment in our education and getting more people in this profession is an investment in communities. It's an investment in government. It's an investment in health. So we really have to take the angle of how, like, what's the cost benefit here? Like, what are we going to get out of paying you? And something we're working on this legislative session in Texas is passing SB 153, which is the social work intern practicum stipend bill, which would provide scholarships to students in Texas who are in their practicum placements, whether they're BSW or MSW students. But yeah.
Yeah, I have a very similar answer as Drew. I'll just talk about it in the New York context. So first, when you're thinking about convincing those in power, it's important to have specific targets and understand what those specific targets are, how they're leaning and framing it as such. For us, so we have spent the last year and a half writing a bill and trying to get that bill passed, we being New York's P4P coalition. And so we did not, as we were pitching the bill to legislators, we did not say, hey, you should spend tens of millions of dollars funding interns because going to work for free really sucks. That is true. There's no doubt about that. But that is not a convincing argument to a state senator who there's only maybe 7,000 social work students in New York at any given time. Asking them for tens of millions of dollars just to help out a couple thousand students, it just didn't seem likely. So the argument we made, which Drew brought up, is you need us. Social workers handle the aging population, the opioid crisis, the homelessness crisis. Every crisis in New York, social workers are on the front line. And if you want to be able to handle the crises that New York faces, you need to ensure that there are more social workers. The demand is outpacing supply. Well, what can we do about it? Create a pipeline of new social workers. How do we do that? Remove the barriers. What's the barrier? Unpaid labor, so pay us. That's kind of how it looked for us. And it got somewhere, right? So like now we have a bill that we wrote to fund every single social work student in New York for their internship. It will hopefully be introduced this month. We're kind of going back and forth on final language. And that's how we did it. So that was really our framing and really leaning to this investment piece, this prevention piece, kind of all of that.
And just to piggyback off of what Dan just said, I've also seen there be success with making that neoliberal capitalist argument of, the labor and how actually, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, social workers make up the nation's largest group of mental health service providers. So there are more clinically trained social workers than psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychiatric nurse practitioners combined. So I think really leaning into that argument and talking about how unpaid internships are holding the field back in its reliance on unpaid labor and how that can be traced to the shortage of social workers in the workforce providing services to vulnerable communities. And then a lot of people that are interested in unpaid internships are also looking and interrogating those licensing exams. So I think really making those connections would really be beneficial for the movement as a whole and the profession.
And I see we have a comment in the chat. Those in power must be made aware of the mental health crisis and the extreme shortage of social workers, which I feel like summarizes this just perfectly. So the next question I have for you guys, and this will be good for Drew and Dan, especially as students advocate for paid practicum placements through P4P or on their own, what kind of organizing can they engage in now to improve their circumstances?
I can jump in. So I'm very fortunate to go to the Graduate College of Social Work, where we have an amazing practicum team that has done a lot of work with faculty and staff and students to make it less burdensome to go and get your social work education. So a big thing that they did was reduce the credit hours required for practicum. So we went from paying for 2 to 3 credit hours per semester for practicum to just 1. So we are paying less to work for free now, which is great. And that saves students $1,900 to $12,800 in tuition, depending on their enrollment and residency status. So that is a really good thing to advocate for. Can we reduce credit hours at the university? So we're not paying as much to work for free and we're still getting, the class credit that says, we're doing our practicum, but we're not paying like extra money. Another thing, or they've done a lot of things, but we have a food and snack pantry at the GCSW. So they partnered with the food pantry on campus and we have like our own location at our college building. They also switched to open access textbooks. We only go to campus 2 days max. And there's a clothing closet where people can donate clothes and students can take clothing from the closet if they need it for professional settings. We share graduation regalia. And they also really have advocated for employment-based practicum. So those are all like some campaign ideas. Students can start mutual aid projects, like the ones mentioned, and it definitely helps if your university is open to starting dialogue about what can we do. If we can't pay you, what else can we do to make it a lot easier for you to get your education?
Yeah, there's a lot that Fordham has talked about similar. I actually want to take one step back, considering who's in the audience, right? As the chat came in, it seemed like a good number of folks are students and a good number of folks were not. And the folks that were not, a lot of people in policy spaces, NASW, saw a lot of that come in. So I want to start with that side of town, which is to say, kind of following up on what we were just talking about. I am of the belief that it tends to be that schools, especially state schools, are underfunded. So providing practicum placements is going to be challenging. Agencies, especially nonprofits and such, tend to be underfunded. So providing funding is going to be hard. So I really believe in government funding. And so for those in state funding and in making the argument that this is a state need and a state good. So for those outside of school, I think that is probably the best thing to organize around is legislation. And we can hopefully spend some time on that. You were not alone. There are bills being introduced all over the country to fund interns or do kind of parallel work on that. And we can get into those bills. It's probably around 10 states, give or take. So there's a lot of work to be done in the legislative space for those that are out of school. For those that are in school, Drew, you mentioned really a lot of the campaigns that are present, I think. The one that I would highlight, the one that feels like it's the lowest hanging fruit is hour reduction. So this feels to be, it's not actual money in people's pockets, but by saving hundreds of hours, you are in some way putting money back in their pockets. And so to context that I'm assuming 90% of you all know, the CSWE has set the floor at 900, but schools go above that. So if your school is above that, if your school requires 1,200 or 1,100 or even 10 or 950, you can organize and say, wait, the floor is 900, why are we doing more than this? There is no reasonable argument in my mind that you should be doing more than 900. There is zero evidence to show that more hours aids in better learning outcomes. In fact, there is zero evidence to show that 900 hours in and of itself is a useful place for education, right? And one of the, I think, long-term goals I'm really interested in is pushing CSWE to reconsider, wait, is 900 hours actually best for our students and their learning needs? But in the meantime, while that bigger project happens, reducing your hours to the 900 floor, I think is the easiest, lowest hanging fruit. And the more schools that do it, the more schools will do it because they're concerned about enrollment. And if I could choose a 900-hour school versus a 1,200-hour school, well, I know where I'm going, which is the argument that we made. As said, this was successful. And I know it has made a very impactful material difference in the life of myself and other students, which is what I care about, changing the material experience of students right away. The other ones I would kind of shout out is just humanistic policies. So if your university does not require that you get lunch, that should be in all student manuals. If your lunchtime at your practicums, right, that should be required. If you don't get sick time, that should be required, right? Basic worker rights, but we are not considered workers, and therefore we often don't get the rights that workers get. And so ensuring that you have just a base level of experience in your own human rights. And the final thing I'll say is rate my field. Drew, I don't think you mentioned this, or if you did, I'll elaborate on it really quick, is that some universities are putting together, if you know Rate My Professor, very similar, Rate My Field, which is a way for students to get some transparency into what they're walking into. Because so often students have no idea the internship they're walking into and no idea if it actually aligns with their career. And so instead of just walking in blind, it empowers students to know what they're getting themselves into. So those are some ideas. P4P chapters have done so many things. So if you're a student and wanting some ideas, there's 59 models out there. So please contact and we can help you figure out what makes sense in your context.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Christian, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I would, continue pulling on that thread and gently encouraging CSWE to, really invest and commit to the movement for payment for placements. I'm heartened by the recent joint statement that payment for placements made with the Council on Social Work Education. And I just hope that we continue going in that path. And also at the state level, considering things are very volatile at the federal level with recent changes in the federal approach to everything. So I would really lean on your state legislatures. I put in the chat, I'm putting in the chat right now. So in Michigan, they have the Student Mental Health Apprenticeship Program for retention and training. So that was to incentivize people going into school-based social work, school psychology, school mental health counselors. This is akin to Title IV grants, which are federal grants to incentivize people to enter the child welfare sector and stay in the child welfare sector. Speaking as someone who did work in child welfare, I burned out like a light in less than a year. And so just kind of being more mindful of how we're funneling money into the field, and just being strategic with that and seeing how we can replicate that for everyone.
Yep, it's all about sharing resources and being able to replicate it as often as you can so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I will do a quick plug of the Advocacy Alliance. That is one of our main goals, is to just give people a platform to share what's worked so that we can learn from one another, and just be able to replicate that. Now, I do want to say someone posed in the chat just a question to ask for clarification on the number and the name of the bill in Texas and New York. So if you guys, Drew and Dan, if you could speak to that in the chat, to provide those numbers, that would be great. Dan, I know there may not be a number yet for yours.
Yeah, exactly right. So we have the final bill draft language back. We just got it back, and we are working with them as we speak. We're meeting with them in 2 days, I think, to really hammer it home, and then hopefully it'll be introduced in the next couple of weeks. So we're really close. It's been a mountain of work, and we're almost there. And then once it's introduced, it's going to be a mountain of work to get it over the finish line, to actually get passed. But that is, its own. Holy cow, the person who I think was asking that is my professor. Hi, Professor Azar. Good to see you.
So I do want to think about, so I know it's an absolutely legitimate question and statement that we often hear, like, where do we get the money? How do we find the money? So despite limited resources, what innovative funding strategies have you explored to support paid practicum placements? Essentially, how do we find money to pay students? And Maribel, I'd love it if you could start us off.
Yeah, sure. So this is my experience. I started in our own university. I reached out to the financial aid office and asked them if it was possible if we could have practicum placements be considered for work study. And they absolutely agreed. So we were able to connect certain agencies that were eligible to receive work study funding to our financial aid office. And that was one way that we were able to get BSW students and MSW students paid work study funding if they were eligible. Another way that we have looked into and have really started to embrace was working with faculty. So I reached out to faculty and told them that we are very much looking to get all of our practicums paid. And if there was any opportunity for us to piggyback off of any of their grants that they were applying for, we would love to be able to incorporate practicum and our students. And so we have had a couple of people writing grants and including our students in there for stipends and for also for, just supplies and different things that can support them while they're in their practicum. Let's see, I have really just encouraged a lot of our agencies to look into grant funding as well. And if I see something, if I hear of something, and I think that there's an agency that would be great for that grant, I reach out to them and I tell them, hey, there's this grant that you can be eligible for, and we would be happy to write a letter of support if you include our students. And so that is one thing that we're working on right now as well. Those are just a couple of the ways that we have tried to identify some money. And then we've also taken some, we've also have some agencies that are very interested in paying their students. And so they're looking at how they can do that. In New Mexico, if a student is supervised by a licensed clinician, they can actually bill, and they're using that money to pay for the student as well.
Well, and I know that your role as a practicum director, it just is so helpful that you are supportive of students getting paid and it being a priority in your office. I think it's just a great way to, honestly attract students to your university, but then also to gain the trust of your students, knowing that you have an investment in this. And so Dan and Drew, do you guys have any thoughts on kind of innovative funding strategies for getting students paid?
Okay, I'll go first. The only definitely federal work study, that's important. And also something that we've done is started a fund through the university so that people can donate directly to us for Giving Tuesdays. And then that money can go straight to the students for practicum expenses. So that is something that can be done. And then, yeah, definitely state legislative advocacy. That's some money that could potentially be tapped into.
So I've sort of previewed this, that my belief, I'm sure there is some money to be tapped into in some places for in agencies and schools, but I am of the belief that this should be a government provided funding. That is not totally out of the blue. I think probably the best parallel here is that doctors are funded, residencies are funded through the federal government, and states pitch in. What is not parallel to that is that residency is not technically during school, it is after school, but it is still a required part of the training, right? So the government says, this is an important service and therefore we should invest in it, and does so. And specifically, they started funding doctor residencies in 1965 with the passage of Medicare. Prior to that, there was a critical physician shortage. With the passage of Medicare and thus residency funding, the number of doctors in the country skyrocketed, right? So we often use that as an example to say, look, if you fund the training, the people will come. We need mental health people in the mental health field, as Christian was talking about. We need all these social workers for all these reasons. If you want it, the people will come. So there's that to say. We're not the only field that is dealing with this. Student teachers is another example of a parallel profession. In Maryland, they recently passed a bill to fund Master of Education students through the state government, $20,000 a year for their student teaching year, understanding they had a critical teacher shortage, and also that there was a demographic mismatch between teachers and who they were teaching. And this is something we haven't talked much about, the racial justice argument of all of this, and the larger kind of immigrant, all of this kind of component of all of this, which is that it's not only that there aren't enough social workers, but it's also who is entering the profession, right? You have this unpaid barrier that's going to really limit the class, the racial backgrounds, all of these sorts of things of who enters the profession. And so we see this, that in New York, something like 60% of students enrolled, social work students enrolled, are white, and 80% of the people that social workers serve are people of color. So there's a massive demographic mismatch between who is doing the work and who is serving. Again, all of this we believe hopefully would be resolved if students were paid through the budget. So that's also been a core argument of ours as well.
I couldn't agree more with what Dan just said. And I would also just add the recent loosening of educational policies and accreditation standards by the CSWE. They've been way more lenient with employment-based practicums. And so the majority of employment-based practicums, no, well, let me not say that. The majority of paid internships can be found at employment-based practicums. So students are able to leverage their current role to negotiate getting compensated for their internship, whether that be doing other tasks to make sure they're still learning, because it should be a learning opportunity and experience overall, but it's like you said earlier, Aiden, it's not a either or, it's a both and.
Can I
Yeah.
add one more quick thing to that?
Yeah, Dan.
Kristen, you sparked something, which is that also in this kind of back in my day argument component of this, or like reasons why to keep this in place, one of the core arguments is that because it's for your education, it is an educational good. It's not work. You're supposed to be learning. So just, and I don't know, well, anyway, if you look at the Department of Labor regulations on this, the requirement for an educational internship is that you are not replacing or replicating the tasks of paid employees. I know for myself that I do exactly the same work as paid employees. And I know that every student I talk to does exactly the same work as all the other paid employees, right? So I don't know, Christian, you may have seen, I don't know if there's been a research study on kind of if there's a number on it, but I just know anecdotally, all of us are doing all the exact same work. Yeah, exactly. That fact sheet. Thank you, Amber.
Yes, and Maribel, I wanted to ask you, so thinking back to, we have all of these ways that we can try to get to paid internships, whether it's through state or federal level, like advocacy, but also just in like partnering with agencies and trying to brainstorm ways. Could you speak to how you partner agencies in conversations or engage agencies in these types of conversations? And do you have any examples of successful partnerships in trying to get students paid?
Yeah. So we try and engage the conversation, the paid practicum conversation, right when we meet with the agency right away. So when we do our affiliation agreements with them, we talk about how it's, it would benefit them to offer paid practicums. We talk about the different options that they have that they can look into to provide these paid practicums. And then we just talk about the importance of offering these to our students. Really, it's a lot of talking and a lot of listening and a lot of back and forth about, is it possible? Is it not possible? We, have a lot of agencies that continuously come and work with us and take 5 to 10 to 15 of our students, and they use them very well, right? And they're building their own workforce while they're creating, they're creating workers that will stay with them, and they do keep them on and hire them on after graduation. And we kind of use that and say, look, you're building your workforce here, and these students deserve to be compensated for that. We have several success stories with our agencies here in town. One specific agency that I can think of is a private practice that she actually opened up a nonprofit agency, and she took on several students, and she was like, I am taking on all of these students, but I'm not going to let them not be paid. So she actually had fundraisers for them. She had a GoFundMe page. She asked all of her friends and all of her social media friends, hey, I've got these great social workers. They're so wonderful, and I want to provide these professional development opportunities for them. I want to be able to make sure that they can feed their families. Can you help me? And our community came out and supported her. And I can say that all of her students that she took this year are being paid, and they're also going to professional development that is being paid for by our community. They've done enchilada dinners, they've done, bingo nights. They really work together to find funding to pay our students. And so that's one of the really success stories that I have. It can start at the grassroots level. And then I also really encourage our agencies to continue to talk to our representatives and our senators about the need for compensation. One of the things that we recently talked to about somebody was that our state does not have loan payback for social workers. And so that's one thing that we're also looking at introducing to the legislator, and I think it's actually being introduced this session. And so those are just some of the things that we talk about, some of the things that we talk to about our agencies, and really it's just a lot of conversations and a lot of listening.
And I love that example with that agency and that one person who is just motivated to really
Yep.
support their students, and acknowledging that it's like the social work education model could be such a huge benefit, and is a huge benefit to agencies, in that they're, like you said, developing their workforce with a learning and basically training partner to ensure that time to reflect and to, have a lot of learning. And when those internships are paid and students aren't also split into having a lot of their time and energy focused on paid work in addition to the practicum and everything, it really lets the benefits that can come from that educational model flourish. So I really appreciate that. And what a beautiful example. So before we get to our questions from the chat, I just want to pose to all of you to get your brief thoughts. What can we all do right now to help social work students get paid for their internships?
I can start. So I would say for students and even faculty, anybody, just start a conversation about unpaid practicum and how it's affecting students, you, your community, anything. Get involved with the P4P movement, connect with us, like start a chapter. It doesn't take too many people to start. I had 2 other students that were really passionate, and that enabled us to get the chapter started and to do our work. And then another thing I would say is to advocate for yourself. I've had other students that were really passionate about this just go and ask their agencies, like, can you pay me? And they may have said no, but that's opening the door for those conversations and for changing like the social norms around paid practicum placements. And then for like alumni or people who work at agencies, advocate to pay interns at your place of employment. I've seen a lot of agency employees take it upon themselves to start advocating within the agencies they work for to get students paid, and it's been very successful. I've had people write it into their budgets if they work for like the city or state government, so that there is funding there for an intern. And then another thing you can do is talk to your state NASW chapter and like connect with them and get them to help you sponsor legislation. NASW Texas worked with us to get the SWIPS bill, and they've been really lobbying and advocating for that bill on our behalf. So definitely connect with them if you can.
Yeah, I would definitely hammer home everything Drew just said. All politics are local, so start where you're at, do what you can with what you have until you can do more. So I think some of the approaches that we've talked about today, like hours alignment and reducing the credit hours, are just little steps we could do to keep the momentum going and continue holding the Council on Social Work Education accountable and the institutions that we attend. So if you can't afford to pay, where is the tuition going? How is that money being spent? I think Martin Luther King Jr. said budgets are moral documents. So put your money where your mouth is.
And I'll go ahead and step in. And I don't know if there are any faculty members that are here, but if there are, I would suggest that you start talking to your colleagues about the importance of paying students. I have a great team behind me that 100% supports my efforts in trying to identify as many agencies and as many paid practicums as we possibly can. I talk about it to all of my faculty colleagues and answer any questions that they have. And we're taking these conversations up the ladder to our deans, to our presidents, and even beyond that. So we're recognizing that there is a need and really trying to get a team behind us, because there's power in numbers, and just having that support makes it 100% better.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything that was said about, it's hard to say one thing because every context is going to be different. I think organizing in local contexts is step one. And the thing that I would say to provide some motivation is things can change. It is a dark and scary time out there, but in this world, things like in this social work bubble on this particular issue, things are moving, albeit slowly, but real momentum is happening. Actually, I shouldn't say slowly. P4P started 3 years ago, and look how much we've done. P4P has an internal wins tracker from all over the country, from small little chapter wins to, and every once in a while when I'm feeling discouraged, I look at that and I'm like, holy shit, we are doing stuff. So I really, I think there's something to be said around this whole SMART goal framework of choosing something that can change, not something, but in your context, right? What's the thing that's the lowest hanging fruit that actually can make a material impact to the lives of students now? And there are many such things, and many such wins have happened. And with that knowledge, go forth and talk to your people. And yeah, let's do the thing.
Awesome. So now I'm gonna go ahead and take some questions from the chat, and we have some awesome questions there. I wanted to kind of backtrack to a question we got a while back, but important about P4P chapters. So Drew and Dan, your thoughts on this are great. Is one of the roles of a P4P chapter to aid a university or college program in finding organizations or placements willing to pay on top of advocating on the local, state, and national levels for the movement?
I can start. My thinking is yes, personally, but there's many P4P folks on this call, and I'm sure there's a range of opinions. There is no P4P doctrine. Like, this is the thing you have to advocate for. Each individual chapter is somewhat of an autonomous node, and then all of us, all the chapters, form the national picture, and we have kind of a national guiding body. But if a chapter thinks that makes sense in that chapter's context, I see fully no reason why that shouldn't be something y'all advocate for.
Yeah, I think what Dan said is good. I think my immediate reaction was that I'm not sure, like at my school, our practicum team finds the organizations. So we would advocate for them maybe to look for ones that are going to pay us, but we wouldn't like find the organizations, I guess. So like Dan said, like whatever makes sense for your context. And yeah, there's no rule book. There's just it's whatever makes sense for you in your chapter.
And just thinking to P4P chapters for another sec. So we have a co-chair for one of our newest chapters with Ohio State University, which is super exciting here. And they asked, what have you found works for gaining new members in the P4P movement? They have like 1,000 students in their School of Social Work, but are struggling to grow their P4P chapter.
What has worked best for me is talking to people in my classes that I'm either friends with or close with, and then asking, hey, well, I start a conversation about paid practicum and like unpaid practicum and like, how is it going? And it kind of spirals into a rant session. And then that rant session becomes, okay, like, will you come to this meeting? Like, do you want to do something about this? And it is difficult because we are asking students who are suffering from having to work for free. We're asking them to do more free labor to get paid, potentially, and they might not get paid. It might be someone who comes in after them. So it's a hard sell, honestly. So you really it's about connection and just like trying your best to get students to feel like they can be included. Another thing you can do is like have smaller actions that any student can participate in, like a petition or something like that, to get more people into the movement that maybe don't have the capacity to actually organize with you. And I think another good point is that you don't need like a lot of people necessarily. You just need a few people really dedicated. to P4P to make a real difference. Even just having one person that is committed to making a difference can make a change at your university. So
Yeah, and I'll just tack on to that. For any university like faculty or staff, if they're wanting to learn ways that they can improve their programs in the future, like P4P chapters and members of P4P are great people to ask for consultation with, because they're hearing a lot of, they're getting so much information from students because they are a safe space. There's not any type of compromised position of being in the role of an agency supervisor or a university staff. The student can speak really freely. So I encourage, faculty and staff to reach out to your P4P chapters and ask them for insight and information that they can share in a general context of students' experiences. So I have another question from the audience. How have you all navigated engaging faculty? At my alma mater, there are many faculty members who don't have social work backgrounds themselves and don't seem to fully grasp what our day-to-day looks like. There's also swift backlash from higher ups, which makes it very difficult for non-tenured faculty to publicly vocalize support. Great question. Who wants to take this one first?
I'll talk about what we've done here at NMSU. We have a very supportive faculty, and we actually have some tenured faculty who have come out and said, if there's anything that needs to be said, we support you and we can take that up, and you don't have to put yourself out there if you're non-tenured, which is amazing. And so it's just really just about having those continued conversations. We do have some faculty that don't necessarily support paid practicums, but it is my job to continue conversations and to keep bringing it up and to keep encouraging students to advocate for themselves. And so I don't have all the answers, but that's where we are right now.
Yeah. And no, that's the thing, a big thing, a common thread that we continuously acknowledge in the P4P movement is none of us has all the answers. We're not any one of us is meant to have all the answers. The beauty of the movement is figuring out all of the different ways we can solve this together in advocacy for students. So anyone else want to respond to that one?
So, well, firstly, again, acknowledging that one of my professors is on, so clearly we had some support within the faculty at our school. But we had a spreadsheet, and we listed every professor, and we only listed every tenured professor for that exact reason. There were a lot of adjuncts that are very supportive, but we did not want to put them in any sort of tenuous position. So we had the full listing of all the professors, and then we kind of split up who was going to gauge who, and then just a tracker of like who's supportive, who's not. And then once we felt that we really had faculty support, we asked them to vote on our hours reduction campaign, and they voted unanimously. Not a single professor voted that it should be what it was. They all voted to reduce it. And from there, that just had so much momentum going into the dean, right? 100% of faculty, tenured faculty was with us, that it again, kind of made it inevitable.
And I would just briefly add, it's not always the message, it's also the messenger. So like leverage your power, those who have tenure, like Mari said, and those who are able to take those risks, I would encourage you all to do so tactfully. I think of Bettina Love when she talks about the difference between an ally and a co-conspirator. A co-conspirator will take the risk. An ally will just attend the webinar, attend the training. They know all the right words, but who can really step up to create the change that we're wanting to see?
And what a great segue to our next question. So what talking points do you recommend to social work students and faculty who cannot utilize language such as social justice, economic justice, or even the word advocacy in states where these actions are banned in higher education? Um, Huge question that I think we're all trying to figure out. But would anyone want to speak to this one first?
I don't have a direct answer. I have a tangential answer, which I hope sparks something. Which is it is incredibly dark times, right? We all know that. And so that to me makes it all the more important to fund interns. And so that's kind of our argument as we've been hit with similar responses of like, look at what the Trump administration is doing. Like, how can we possibly focus on that? Right. Or if someone was saying you can't use the word diversity, whatever it is, that's proof in the pudding that we need social workers now more than ever. And so bringing it back to that of if we pay interns, so like all these communities are under attack. We need social workers now. The way to do that, pay interns. That's how we've dealt with kind of that basic argument when folks bring up everything happening at the federal level. We all have to ideate more about this, though.
I think that's such a good point. And I'll just add from my own perspective, my thoughts are we are expressing values and building culture by the way that we carry ourselves and the practices we engage in. And so modeling to people who are in training, to students, to faculty, modeling what we would like to see and having it become an organic part of organizational culture, which is hard and it takes a lot of thought and intention, I think can be a way to get past that. And it makes me think of the CSWE in their EPOS, they talk about implicit curriculum. It's not just the classes and the content in the class, but everything that is being taught without words as you are within a program, what you learn from just the way that you engage. And so that's kind of my thoughts on it, but that I would say that is a huge question that all of us, like Dan said, are going to need more time to figure out.
Yeah, the implicit curriculum is so important, and I feel like it's that forgotten middle child. People are just wanting to focus on the explicit curriculum. What do we need to say that we do to get reaccredited? And I would push back and I would challenge agencies and programs to actually walk the walk, I guess. I also put in the chat some alternative wording for grant writing that my friend sent me, which it's sad that we need something like this, but I think this is a really cool resource. I'm also in Texas, so there's been threats to academic freedom and anti-DEI and SB 17. So a lot of the DEI related programs here at my current institution have been renamed belonging or student success. Or so I've been really impressed by how people have changed some of their language around these issues.
I'm gonna hop in and say language definitely matters, and like changing language somewhat feels like you're erasing the work, but you're still doing the work. You're just doing it under different terms. And I think in Texas, yeah, especially we've had to really adjust to that and think, how can we make this like palatable while still doing really good work that they probably would not agree with. So yeah, just echoing what Christian said.
And I mean, I have to ask another challenging question that's just so relevant right now. What suggestions and advice do you have for students and soon to be social workers regarding navigating the current climate and policy changes? How can we effectively perform our jobs and advocate while also ensuring our own safety and well-being?
My university is struggling with this right now. We are coming together as faculty once a week to have support sessions, to talk about the changes that are happening, to talk about the resources that we can offer our students. We recently received word that we have to scrub a lot of the language from our websites, which has never happened to us before. We're a blue state. And so we are struggling. And what I can say and what we have come up with is to try and identify resources for our students, to try and be a supportive, steady hand for our students, and to have a good support system behind you. That's really what we're focusing on right now.
And I know that is a very challenging position to be in. So we appreciate that. All of those efforts on behalf of students. Christian, yeah.
Yeah, I would also just echo that and just really emphasize self-care. I know that was recently added to the Code of Ethics, and it cannot be any more important than it is right now. Take care of yourself today so you can fight tomorrow. We're really coming up against a lot of uncertain times, especially with this new administration. So just making sure that you're in it for the long game. This is a marathon, not a sprint.
Absolutely. And shifting to a little bit different topic, and Christian, I think you'll be a great person to touch on this. Is there interest in establishing a network of faculty and students researching this topic? Which I would say there definitely is.
I would say there definitely is as well. And labor and economic justice are really hot right now. And P4P is timely and trendy and needed. So I would definitely reach out. I worked with Matt DiCarlo and Pilar, who's also on this call, just doing the work wherever you can at every level. So at the national level, the state level, and the local level.
And I'll say another question in the chat is related to like, is it an absolute requirement for each university to start its own chapter to help with the P4P movement, this initiative? Absolutely not. Like anyone can advocate for paid social work placements and practicums. And it may be, you know, as you're kind of power mapping and building a strategy of what the best avenue is to getting paid placements at your university, if a P4P chapter is going to be so like, you know, concerning or not well received by the university for any reason, but you can still find ways to advocate for paid placements, do that. You know, we want to be a resource to provide support and connection with other students. And I'm sure we can still do that regardless of if you have a chapter or not. Just reach out to us and we'll have our email in the chat and all the ways you can connect. But we think P4P chapters are a great resource and avenue to go, but you don't have to. There are definitely ways other than that. So yeah.
Can I speak to the research question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's so much to be done in the research space, and there's a lot being done and a lot of really exciting work being done, and Christian and Pilar are at the forefront of that really exciting work. And I think the more research that we have, the easier it is to make the arguments that we are trying to make. I think, so we've talked to, our chapter and the New York folks have talked to, in addition to the work that Pilar and Christian are doing, or maybe parallel to it, or in tandem with it, talked to a couple of researchers researching hours, which is to me really exciting research, because again, there is no evidence about that 900-hour floor, and so there's been some folks to put out articles looking at the hours and how that deals with education. And then in our bill, we required the Department of the Office of Mental Health to study all the impacts after 4 years of funding interns. What does it do? And we spent a long time developing the criteria to get studied. And we put in probably like 15 to 20 different things to get studied. So there's a lot of room. Things like, how does it affect wages downfield? We've talked about that. How does it impact local economies? Right now, students have money. does that affect economies? Obviously, the demographics of who applies to become social workers, the number of social workers, the dropout rates, right? There's so much in here, and the more hard data that we have, I think the easier and easier the movement becomes. So yes, all for research. I hope that we can do more of it.
Well, I know we're nearing the end of our time together. First, I just want to say thank you, everyone who attended, absolutely our panelists who were here and were able to give their experience, perspective, and insights. For the people who were with the P4P leadership team, particularly Pilar and Amber, who helped behind the scenes and helping get this organized. It's just been such a great discussion. And I also want to say thank you to each and every one of you who are invested in advocating in whatever ways, big or small, that you are. I know there's a lot of energy where we get, frustrated in not having these paid internships, but we also want to acknowledge all of the hard work and efforts that have been put forward by students, practitioners, staff and faculty at universities, agencies who have been able to create these partnerships and find paid placements and make it happen. It's definitely possible. So we just ask that you keep talking about this. You share this with people you come across in your personal lives and your professional lives, and share any resources and connect with one another as you can, as you've met in this space. And we absolutely invite you to connect with us again. I know that in the chat, we placed a lot of resources. Feel free to reach out to those. When in doubt, go to the website to be able to reference more information. We do have our Advocacy Alliance meeting coming up. So we have that P4P supporter survey you can fill out to be able to get more information on a regular basis. And this is, National Week of Action for P4P. So if you know of a local P4P chapter, reach out to them, say hi, ask what you can do to support. They may need someone just like you with your experience to be able to get them to the next step. Follow them on Instagram, do whatever you can just to kind of help us bring awareness to this issue and then gradually make change as we can. So just want to do a huge shout out to honestly everyone who's been here. Very excited, very grateful. With that, please feel free to stick around to go ahead and copy things from the chat as you need them, but we hope that you'll stay engaged and connected with us and have a wonderful evening. Thank you, everyone.